Hey guys, it's Halloween, and I figured what better place to bring you this video than from the H45 convention here in Pasadena, celebrating 45 years of the classic John Carpenter movie. But today, we're not talking about movies. Nope, we're talking about comic books. We're going to check out the entire history of Michael Myers in print. It's kind of hard to believe that it took all the way into the year 2000 for Michael Myers to get a 4-color showcase, but it finally happened with Chaos Comics Halloween #1. So this was 2000. So this was post H2O and pre Resurrection. So as far as the film world knew, Michael had his head chopped off, but they had already announced Resurrection by this point. So people knew that he'd be back. It begins in Haddonfield with Tommy Doyle looking vaguely like the Rudd version, looking to pick up the Loomis files in order to write a book. And it mentions that the doc first met Michael back in '63, right after killing his sister. Grown-up Michael is there, and we get a flashback to the intro of the original film, and then into November of '63, and young Mikey is at the hospital, already showing violent tendencies. He kills several inmates, but they all look like accidents or suicides, and even takes out another doctor. And when Myers arrives at the Doyle's house in the present, he says that he already killed him. So it appears as if this is in the continuity of the original series and taking place after the 6th film. He fights with Tommy, knocking him out of the window on fire, but then Michael disappears. This was followed up a few months later, in April of 2001, again from Chaos, with Halloween 2, The Blackest Eyes. I should point out that this one and the last one were both written by the late Philip Nutman, and this picks up right where the last one left off, and Tommy goes on the hunt. We see the Myers house, and Richie Castle says that it's been 24 years since he met the boogeyman there, and it's shown that he's the kid that bumped into Michael outside the school in the first film, which places this in 2002 then. He goes to burn the place down, but is killed. But then it gets weird because we see Sheriff Brackett, and he says it's been 22 years since Michael killed Annie and her friends, although that was at the same time that Richie met Michael, so one of those dates is a misprint. So this is either 2002, or if the 22 years is correct, then it's 2000. It's the same time frame because Brackett sees Richie's now dead body there, but 2000 may make more sense since it'd be post H2O and pre-Resurrection if this is merging both continuities. It's said that Brackett moved to Pennsylvania, although Part 4 said he retired to Florida, and there's some backstory about Haddonfield saying that it was cursed, and there's a druid leader named Murphy Myers who moved there, running from the witch trials. It's said that the Myers family had a curse almost 2,000 years old, and then they mention Mrs. Blankenship and the cult. So we're firmly in the original timeline. They discuss Michael's birth in 1957, saying that he was stillborn, but then was just alive again, likely soulless due to the curse. They say that Brackett dated Judith Myers before he went away to college, which is weird because the events of the film are 15 years after her death, and he has Annie, and she's in high school and meant to be 17, which means that she'd have been 2 years old when Judith died, so that seems unlikely. Mrs. Blankenship shows up to say, "Right you are," and they capture Brackett and Doyle, but they escape and fight Myers, electrocuting him and blowing him up. But the druids set Tommy up for Brackett's death, sending him to prison. The tale carried on later that year, since in November of 2001, Chaos released Halloween 3, The Devil's Eyes, and in the intro blurb it tells us that the previous 2 issues were 2 years ago. So we'd be in 2002 now, unless they're going with the 2002 date, so this would be 2004? But I think that the previous makes more sense. But then it tells us that it's right before Halloween of 2001, and that 2 years ago, Tommy had his earlier encounter. So the first 2 issues were 1999? And those comments about it being either 24 or 22 years don't make sense, because either one of them, since if that were 99, it would have been 21 years later. Tommy's at Smith's Grove now, and Wynn is still in charge, so he wasn't killed at the ending of Part 6, and Doyle escapes. Lindsay Wallace then reappears, and she says it's 23 years since she met the boogeyman, and that's finally a correct number. And she's now a reporter. But here's where it gets interesting. She says that last year there was a news report that Michael was killed, decapitated by his sister, Laurie Strode. This merges the two universes and places H2O in continuity with the original series in this telling. But yeah, that time frame is still wrong, since that would put H2O in 2000. And the movie is called H2O, and the 2O stands for 20, 20 years later, so 1998, not 2000. It's then said that they found a decapitated man at the crime scene, presumed to be Michael's, and that Laurie is now missing. Lindsay reiterates that it was a year ago, and they say that Tommy is now 32. He was 8 in the original film, so that would make this 24 years later, which would be 2002. So yeah, they needed an editor on this one. There's a flashback to 1970 as Loomis discovers that there's a third Myers child, and it's pointed out that Loomis didn't discover that Laurie was Michael's sister until 78, 8 years after his revelation here. But Mikey arrives and stabs Tommy. Lindsay goes back to the Myers house and fights him, but Tommy's still alive, and together they unmask him, but it's Laurie? She pushes Doyle out the window and I guess kills him, and then it's 4 weeks later and we find out that Laurie was driven mad and in a way became Michael, or else the curse took her over instead. But that was it for Chaos Comics, so that's where their continuity ended. And I guess you could make that its own universe, or like a continuation from the 6th film, if you like. The next Halloween comic was in 2003, and it was an exclusive comic that was created for the H25 convention. You see, in Pasadena every year there's a Halloween convention. At the 25th one, they released Halloween One Good Scare, which tells us on the very first page that it's Halloween of 2003, and we're introduced to a never-before-seen son of Doc Loomis. And then it bounces back 1 year to 2002, and Loomis Jr. is working at Smith Grove, and they have a new patient that claims that Michael Myers is after her, and it's Lindsay. They say that she's 32 years old and she's on the run from Michael, and with the discussion of the Loomis file and Wallace on the run from Michael, it's possible that this is picking up from the Chaos run. But then she says that she saw Michael last year, so we're now in a flashback within a flashback, and I guess in 2001, the same year as the last issue of the Chaos books. But she says that they found Laurie's body and she encounters Michael, and it seems like the first time since 78. So it looks like this is in continuity with H2O and Resurrection, and not the earlier Chaos books. A year passes, so we catch up to the intro, and Myers appears and attacks, and confusingly, the artist has him kill a security guard, but makes him look a whole lot like young Loomis, so it's a bit distracting as to who is getting killed until you see the security badge detail. A nurse talks about moving to Santa Mira, a Halloween 3 reference, and Lindsay slips on blood, like she's the last starfighter or something, and Loomis is too cowardly to help her. Michael then slices Lindsay's tendons so she can't run away and carries her off to kill her. The story picked up again 3 years later with another independent comic from Stefan Hutchinson, who wrote One Good Scare also, and this one was called Halloween Autopsist, and starts with a young man who finds his projectionist father dead in the booth. This, for some reason, inspires him to become a photographer, and he's having some trouble finding work. And a man tells him that Michael Myers is still alive, and he says that the official word is that he burnt to death along with a hospital. He then shows Carter a picture of Annie Brackett dead and says he wants photo proof that Michael is still alive. So it's clear that we're now set in the past since he's meant to follow Loomis, so it's likely this is in the time between parts 2 and 4, or Parts 2 and H2O, depending upon which continuity this wants to be in. Sheriff Brackett makes an appearance, and he says that it's been 15 years since his daughter's death, so that would place this around 1993. So this is in the era between 5 and 6, when Michael has been freed from custody by the Man in Black, but before Loomis got his plastic surgery. But judging from the last issue, it's likely that this is based in some other continuity and not the original, or even its own, but it's likely the H2O continuity, so it's likely that 4 and 5 didn't happen here. While Carter is following Loomis, it turns out that Myers is following him and just kills him. So I do think that this is in the H2O continuity, and that this is likely in the era in between Part 2, when he went missing, and the beginning of H2O. That story was continued, but in an unusual way, with a Hutchinson-written PDF prose comic published directly online called Halloween, Sam, in 2008. It begins in 1957, the year of Michael's birth, and tells of Loomis leaving London to move to the US. It then jumps ahead and basically goes through the Halloween saga, detailing the events of the first film through the Doc's eyes, then moving on to the second film. His supposed death at the end of that one is just as brushed over here as it was in the films, and he just survived, but this is set in the H2O continuity, and then details how he worked with Laurie and created her identity of Carrie Tate, and discusses how he was trying to track Myers down between Part 2 and H2O, filling in some of the gaps between the two. He then has the heart attack discussed in the later film, brought on by his obsession with the evil, and then has a lost love of his from England come over and encounters Marion Crane meeting with Brackett, but Michael soon captures her. But then we realize that Sam is still alive, having survived the heart attack, but Myers appears and brings him Elizabeth's severed hand, revealing that he also brought her along, tied to a chair. Sam convinces Michael to leave, but Loomis discovers that he has carved Carrie Tate into her back, revealing that he knows his sister's new identity. And then he dies, his heart giving out. We're then told that he was pronounced dead in 1995, but the room was all cleaned up, and there's no sign of Elizabeth. It then jumps to 98 and sets up the beginning of H2O. Also in 2008, Halloween would get its first ever series of a sort, with the 4-issue limited series Halloween Nightdance from Devil's Due. Hutchinson stayed on as writer, and Tim Seeley came on board to do the art, and the first page sets us before Halloween in the year 2000. We meet a girl named Lisa, who is a dancer, and then a couple in Chicago. Then, a young girl being held captive with a drawer full of Shatners. A little boy that Lisa used to babysit is sending her horrible drawings, and I mean horrible like they're violent, but I'm also judging his art skills. And Michael shows up to kill Marcy here, and then vanish. Her husband Ryan makes it back to town and tells the police it was Myers, and they say that he's been dead for years, but there's no real insight given as to when this takes place in continuity. But based on the date, this is presumably in the space between H2O and Resurrection. Meanwhile, we find out that 2 years ago, in 1998 I presume, Lisa was babysitting Daniel and was locked into a cellar by an unseen man and was stuck there for 2 days. But now Michael is after her because she bears a resemblance to his sister Judith. He leaves without taking her, but she follows him, running into Ryan along the way. It turns out that Marcy was Daniel's aunt, and they were going to his house, but Michael had already been there and killed them all. And they find where he's been hiding, and Marcy's body, her head turned into a jack-o'-lantern. Myers attacks, and they fight, with the killer cutting out Ryan's tongue and putting a mask on him, causing the police to shoot him dead. Mikey then captures Lisa and buries her alive in a makeshift grave for his sister, completely naked, so yeah.
Yeah, not exactly the cheeriest of endings.
Also in 2008, there was Halloween 30 Years of Terror, obviously celebrating 30 years since the OG film. It starts back in 1978 on that night, and shows us Tommy and Lindsay after they flee the house, going to the Mackenzies, And it then flashes ahead many years with Mary Mackenzie remembering that night, and she's haunted by Michael. And I guess it's kind of ambivalent if he kills her or is just terrorizing her. And then it's a second story, and there's a beauty pageant that's apparently in 1991. And it's one of the stories that was told way back in the very first issue that Hutchinson did about the beauty queen who was found beheaded. And that's it. Uh, that's the whole story. No reason for being in there. The next one is a tale of Lori during the time that she was in the sanitarium in between H2O and Resurrection. And it's a little abstract and it doesn't necessarily give us much new information, and it's just her remembering her youth. The next segment is in 2005, and I guess we have Tommy Doyle here. It's his first appearance in this continuity, and he's married with a son. And then part of the story is a comic within a comic about a guy named Tarantula Man, and Tommy still draws Michael.
Yep, that's that one.
The next takes place in 1989 at the Haddonfield Elementary School, but then Loomis is here again, as is Marion, and they're trying to track Michael. And he tips them off and kills a teacher right under their noses. That's kind of it. Like, pretty much all of these stories are just kind of there. In late 2008, Devil's Due followed that up with a limited series called Halloween, the first death of Laurie Strode, again written by Hutchinson, who had sort of become the official Halloween comic writer, I suppose. It gives us Laurie's point of view, showing us the ending of Halloween 2, and she attends Annie's funeral a few days later. And this isn't the original continuity, since we know that they never found Michael's body, and we see him get a new mask, so not dead after all. But we knew that. And we also see that Jimmy survived, much like in the TV cut of the movie. It's then shown that Laurie and Michael's parents died in a car crash in 1966, a few years after Judith's death, and that's when she was adopted by the Strodes. Laurie has another school friend named Sally that she hangs out with and still sees Mikey stalking her, and Loomis shows back up, and there's flashbacks to a young Michael being creepy, and then it jumps ahead to May of '79, as Laurie graduates from high school, and they say that the way that they covered up her death when she was a child was by saying that she was killed in the car crash with her parents. And then, in a pretty funny moment, he mentions seeing Ben Tramer dying and blames it on some cosmic series of events, like it wasn't you chasing him into the street in front of a speeding cop car, Loomis. Laurie is chased by Michael in a clown costume, and he kills Jimmy, ending on a cliffhanger. But that's where it ended, since the third issue of this 3-issue limited series was never released. It seems some behind-the-scenes issues at Devil's Due caused them to be unable to complete the series, but it's said that number 3 detailed the final actions that she took before faking her death in a car crash to lead into the events of H2O. They had also planned to do another series that never got made called Halloween, the Mark of Thorn, which would have revolved around this version of Tommy Doyle in his comic book, which would be about the Cult of Thorn, sort of tying in the original continuity. But again, this was never released.
So there you have it, several series worth of Halloween comic books, and I think actually what's weird is the continuity of the Halloween comics is more put together than the Halloween movies. Definitely less disjointed, but yeah, I don't know if you enjoyed those. Definitely let me know. I want to hear down below in those comments if you've ever heard of these or if you enjoyed this little trip into the 4-color world. Let me know down below what you thought of that. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe if you enjoyed the channel as well. And please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and check that out. I'll see you very shortly for another great video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.